Hey everybody, Rob here at eTrailer.com. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Roadmaster Direct Connect Baseplate Kit on our 2020 Chevrolet Silverado. Now we're going to go ahead and look at what it looks like and go over some of the features, but here towards the end of the video we're also going to show you how to get it installed. But I know everybody wants to know what it looks like and how they're going to use it before we get into that. Now here you can see our baseplate is going to have a pretty clean look to it. It's actually going to replace our factory tow hooks. And whenever we're not towing, we have the option to actually remove the arm for even cleaner of a look. There's a little ring here. If we pull that ring, we can rotate the arm and then pull it out. And now you can see it's a lot cleaner, and the only thing that's even sticking out just a little bit is the safety chain connection point. And putting the arms in is just as easy. You want to make sure that the end here, the flat part, is on the top and bottom. We'll slide the arm in. And if you watch that pin, it's going to hit the base plate and this ring is going to come forward. We'll push it till it extends out, we'll rotate it, and it locks into place. Now if you're new to flat towing, a base plate is going to be the attachment point so you can hook up your tow bar and safely flat tow your Silverado down the road. Now it's going to help disperse that towing force across the front of your truck so we can have less strain and stress on the front suspension and everything else. And let's face it, it's a lot easier to drive a truck than it is a motorhome. That's the whole point why we want to take it with us. Once we get to the campground, we can set up, get comfortable, but then if we need to go out to dinner, if we need to run to the gas station, it's much easier to grab a passenger vehicle than trying to drive a motorhome around. Now one thing I really like about this base plate is they actually give you attachment points for your electrical socket on the driver's side here, and if we move over to the passenger side, they give you a spot to mount your breakaway switch. Now keep in mind that the breakaway switch and the braking system, as well as the electrical components, are not going to be included with the kit, but it is really nice that they give you a spot to mount it. We're not going to have to find a spot somewhere, find a way for it to look nice, and potentially drill into the bumper. Like most base plates, we're going to have our safety chain attachment points right here. Now I like the fact that they're on the inside because they are going to be kind of tucked in out of the way of our attachment point for our base plate, but you're still going to have plenty of room to get those hooked on and to take them off. And whenever you're looking for a base plate for your Silverado, it's important that you make sure that your base plate is going to be compatible with the tow bar that you're going to be using. And our Roadmaster Direct Connect base plate kit is going to be compatible with all Roadmaster motorhome mounted tow bars. And what that means is it's going to be compatible with the tow bars that slide directly into the receiver tube, and they aren't going to use a ball mount or any other kind of coupler to hook up. However, there are some adapters that you can use that will adapt your Roadmaster base plate to accept a different manufacturer's tow bar. Now you can find those here at eTrailer.com. Now if you're wondering about the installation, it is pretty straightforward. Now, the bumper is going to have to be temporarily removed, but honestly, it's not that bad to get all the pieces off. And once you have the bumper off, the base plate goes on very quickly. There's no actual drilling involved. We just have to enlarge one hole that's already there, so we're just making it a little bit bigger, and everything else is just going to bolt right up. And you can see here that we did have to do a little bit of minor trimming, but the way the opening is kind of designed, you don't really even notice that we trimmed any bit of it out. It's definitely something you can do at home. There's no special tools required, but let's go ahead and make sure you have the confidence to do it at home, and we'll walk through the installation process together.
To begin our installation, we want to open up the hood and come right to where the hood latch releases. Now it's going to be held on by two screws. So we'll grab a T15 Torx bit, and we're going to pull those two screws out. Now to completely remove it, we just want to grab that lever and we're going to slide towards the front of the car, and it'll just slide right off the actual latch itself. Now you want to hold on to these and set them aside because we are going to be reinstalling these. Next we need to remove the plastic radiator cover. Now there's going to be a lot of these plastic push pins going around the perimeter, and if you look closely you'll see that there's kind of a top section and a bottom section. We need to pull that center section out first. So if you get a flat blade screwdriver or a trim panel tool, you want to come underneath the center. You can see how it's kind of separating. You want to pop that center section up first, and that's going to unlock the push pin. Then we can come underneath the base and pull the rest of it out. Now we want to do that for all the remaining push pins that we have, working our way around until we get them all out and we can remove that cover. And once you have all those push pins removed, you just want to pull that cover out and set it aside for right now. Now underneath that cover, that's going to expose a few bolts. Now it's kind of important to pay attention to which bolts you're pulling out. If we look at our grill, we can see that it's attached to this black plastic tab and there's a bolt going through it. There's going to be two on each side, and those are the two we're going to need to remove. There are a few other bolts that are painted the same color as the body that are close to those, but we don't need to worry about those right now. We just want to pull out the black bolts that are holding the grill in place. I'm going to be using a 10mm socket to pull those out. Now even once you get those bolts out, you may be tempted to just grab the grill and start pulling. You really don't want to do that, especially in the top corners here, because you can see there is a little bit of movement, but there's actually an alignment pin in there with the hole, so you don't want to just rip on it because it'll break it. So you can grab a trim panel tool. You want to come underneath where that bolt was and just very gently lift up while you're pulling out slightly, and you can see that'll release it and give you enough room to pull it out. So we're just going to go through and go all those spots that had bolts in them and just gently lift up and pull out. Now that'll release the top of it, but that's not going to release the entire grill just yet. Now to get the grill loose, it is just clipped in place, but I will let you know it is very tight. And you want to make sure these pieces are loose on top, because we are going to really have to pull pretty firmly straight out. And if these aren't released, these are going to break. So what I like to do, just so we have the most leverage to pull and we're not pulling on something thin, is I'll try to grab somewhere close to the center, because we have a nice thick section there. And again, making sure that top section's loose. And we're just going to grab the grill and pull straight out. We'll move to the other side and release that side at the same time. That way we're not trying to fight it and bend it. Once you get both sides released, again, double check those top pins. And then carefully remove the grill and set it aside. Next, we need to move under the front of our Silverado now. Now we need to remove this skid plate that we have here, and it's being held on by 4 bolts, 1 at each corner. So I'm going to grab myself a 13mm socket, and I'm going to pull all 4 of those bolts out so we can set the skid plate aside. Lower it down and set it aside for right now. Now, if we move to the front, right at the bottom of the bumper here, we're going to find these bumper stiffeners. There'll be 2 bolts on the bottom, and then 1 that's closer to the top of the frame here that's holding it in place. I'm going to grab a 10mm socket, and we're going to pull all 3 of those bolts out, and then pull the stiffener out itself. And just slide backwards, and we pull it down. Now we're going to have another one of these in the same location, but on the other side of the frame. So we're going to pull that and hold on to the bolts as well. At this point, we're going to be getting ready to remove the bumper from our truck. Now, I left a few bolts up top in place because it's easier to get those once you're actually trying to remove the bumper and have those as the last bolts, rather than trying to remove ones down here. So we're going to remove all the bolts we need to down here, and the bumper will still have bolts holding it in place. Then we're going to move up top, take those final bolts out, and remove it. So if we do come underneath, we want to come to the very edge, kind of the inside of our wheel well here. And if you look at the very corner, you'll find this support brace, kind of a bar that's connecting the frame to the bumper. And there's going to be a bolt attaching it at the very bottom. We're going to grab a 15mm socket, and we're going to pull that bolt out. Now we're going to have one of these bolts on each side, so you want to remove the other side as well. And you kind of want to give it a little wiggle, make sure it is loose and it's not going to get caught on anything once we go to pull the bumper off. Now if we move towards the center of underneath our bumper, right on the inside of each frame rail, you're going to find a few bolts on the side, but then we're going to have this little tab that's coming towards the back of the truck and a bolt's coming down through the bottom. We remove each one of these bolts. Now they are kind of in an awkward spot just because we have something right above it, so there's not a whole lot of room, but you want to grab yourself an 18mm socket and we're going to remove those bolts. But again, you can remove these without having to worry about the bumper being too loose because there is 2 more bolts holding it in place up top. And with this one removed, we're going to move to the other side and remove the other one as well. So now each corner on our front bumper, if we come to the rubber section right here, if we lift it up and we look right underneath it at the corner, you're going to find another 18mm bolt. Now these 2 bolts on the corner are the only thing that's holding the bumper in place anymore. So I like to put my leg against it, kind of hold it in place, and I'm going to pull that last bolt out on each side. And once we have that bolt removed, you want to gently flex out on the outer edge of the bumper to release it from that support tab. And then I do suggest getting an extra set of hands because the bumper is rather heavy, and we're going to very carefully start pulling it away. You may or may not have wiring on the passenger side. If you do, you want to make sure you disconnect any plugs. But we're going to go ahead and set our bumper aside where it won't get damaged. So behind your bumper, it's going to expose your tow hooks, which there's most likely some kind of plastic or foam piece surrounding it. So you can just grab that, pull it off of each side, and then we can get ready to remove the tow hooks from each side. Now our tow hooks are going to have 2 bolts holding it on. So you want to grab an 18mm socket and wrench because that forward bolt is going to have a nut on it as well. So you want to make sure you hold the nut on one side while you try to remove the nut or try to remove the bolt from the other side. Now our tow hooks are not going to get reinstalled, so we can just go ahead and set the hardware and the tow hooks aside. Now if we look inside the channel where our tow loop was, or if we look from the bottom, you're going to notice there's a couple holes. There is a small round hole in there, and that round hole needs to be enlarged to a 1/2 inch. The easiest way to do that is if you grab yourself a 1/2 inch drill bit, and we can drill from the bottom going up. And you just want to make sure that you have a good hole on your drill bit or your drill, because since it's already there, we don't want it to be skipping around or cause any damage, but we want to make sure that a bolt can fit all the way through there. So I'm going to go ahead and enlarge this to the final size of a 1/2 inch. And when this one's enlarged, we're going to move to the other side and drill that one out as well. Now, it's never a good idea to leave exposed metal on your vehicle, especially on the frame, no matter how small it is. So I'm going to come back with some spray paint and cover up the exposed areas, hopefully preventing any kind of rust or corrosion from building up. And we're going to make sure we do that for any time that we drill or cut anything that will expose any kind of metal. Right underneath this section where the tow hook was, if you have these tabs or this bracket that's bolted to the bottom of the frame here, this also is going to have to get removed. So we want to grab an 18mm socket and wrench, and we're going to remove the large bolt going through here. And if we move to the outside of the frame, on the back corner here, we're going to have another bolt that's holding this bracket in place. So we're going to grab a 10mm socket, and we'll pull that bolt out of that back corner. And once that's removed, we can pull that bracket down, and this is not going to get reinstalled, but we are going to have to remove the one from the other side. So at this point, we can start getting our base plate main receiver brace in place. But we need to make sure we get our hardware in place and we have the correct hardware. So we want to grab one of the long bolts out of our kit, and each one of the bolts is going to get a little bit of Loctite on them. So I just like to put a little bit on the threads on each one of the bolts before I install them. So it's a good idea to go ahead and grab your long bolt, put a little bit of Loctite on there, and then grab the driver's side main receiver brace, and we can start getting everything loosely in place. The driver's side is going to have the two small tabs that are coming out. Those are going to be for your electrical mountings. But if you're looking at them, the easiest way to tell is you can kind of see it has these ears or tabs that go down. They need to be pointing down towards the back of the truck, and then the safety chain connection point is going to be in the center. So if you know that it's in the correct orientation facing up, and we know this is in the center, this should be the driver's side. We're going to take our brace and we're going to go through or go around the tab for our safety chain connection. I'm going to take a little bit of wiggling to get it into place. But we want to line up the bolt holes so that this first hole lines up with the same holes we use for our safety chains, and we're going to have the bolt go all the way through. Again, it just may be a little tight depending on how much powder coat is on the brace and if there's any kind of undercoating or anything else that's on the frame here. But once you get everything lined up, you're going to take your bolt with that red Loctite. You're going to pass it through, making sure it goes all the way through. And right here, I will let you know, it's very limited on space because of those tabs. And we need to get a lock washer and a hex nut in place. So if you can, before you push the bolts all the way through, leave yourself a little bit of room, even if it is just a little bit like this. So where you can get the nut in, and then we can start the nut by hand. And it's a lot easier to tighten the bolt up from the other side, holding this with a wrench, than it is trying to get everything crammed in there because we have limited space because of that tab here. Now for the rear hole, it is going to be a little bit different, because if you remember on our tow hook, we had a bolt that went all the way through with the nut on the outside, but that rear hole had a nut welded on the inside. Now we don't have that on our base plate, but we need to get our short bolt. And again, put a little bit of Loctite on there. Then we're going to follow it up with a split lock washer, then a flat washer. And this is the bolt we're going to use to go in right here. But in order to get everything secured down to the base plate and actually have it thread into something, we want to grab the small nut plate that's in our kit. Now if you look, we're going to have a very large hole in the frame. That's where we're going to put our nut plate in through until we can get it to line up with the hole in our base plate. Now fortunately enough, we have a really large opening at the front, so it's pretty easy to line everything up. You actually just reach your hand in and then peek on the side and get the threads lined up. We're just going to loosely thread everything in place. Now I like to leave everything pretty loose in the beginning, just so if I need to make any kind of adjustments or move anything, it's a lot easier to do that than it is if everything's really tight. I also like to leave the handles attached and not cut them until everything's tight, because the handle's going to keep it from spinning because it'll trap it, and then the bolt will continue to tighten up. Now we also have those bolts on the bottom here. Now if you also notice, if you look right where our outer tab is in the frame, there's actually a gap. Now we don't want that gap in there. We don't want it to flex when we go to tighten anything down. So we're going to grab the spacer block that comes in our kit, and we're going to fit this in between so that the holes line up It may be a kind of a tight fit, but you should be able to tap it in there, and if it is too tight where you really can't maneuver it, a trick is you can take a flathead screwdriver or something small and you can go through the hole and use that to line it up. And with the spacer in place, we want to grab one of the long bolts out of our kit. This time we're going to follow it up with a flat washer. We want to pass the bolt through the bracket, through the frame, and have it come out on the other side. Now again, it may be a little bit tight and it may be a little bit off. So that's why, again, I like to leave everything kind of loose so I can kind of wiggle everything and get all the hardware to come through and line up properly. And then once the bolt comes through, you want to follow it up with a flat washer, a lock washer, and then finally secure it down with a hex nut. So there's one more attachment point at the very bottom of the base plate where we enlarged that hole when we drilled it out last. Now this is going to be very similar to when we mounted that one with the nut plate. We're going to use a different size nut plate, but we want to grab one of the shorter bolts from our kit. We'll follow it up with a split lock washer, then a flat washer. Then we'll grab the large nut plate out of our kit. It's always a good idea to double check that the bolt you have does actually fit that nut plate rather than try to get everything in place and fight it after the fact. But we're going to use that same access hole to feed our nut plate in. Except this time, instead of going to the side, we're going to be going to the bottom. And again, fortunately, we have that space right here to where we can reach our hand in and get everything lined up. But the main goal is the same thing. We want to line up that bolt with the nut plate to where we can thread the bolt into the nut plate and secure everything down. But that'll finish up this side, so we're going to go ahead and move over to the other side and repeat the same process, and it's all going to have the same combination of hardware. Once both sides are in place, you want to come back with a 3/4 inch socket and wrench, or you can use a 19mm socket and wrench, and you want to snug up all your hardware. We're going to go back and repeat that for all of the remaining hardware that we have. Now I'm going to come back with a torque wrench and I'm going to torque all of my hardware down to the specified amount in the instructions. Now they do have a specific order they want you to torque the hardware in. They want you to start with the bottom and then go from the front to the back. Now at this point, we can get ready to put the fascia back on. However, if you have more components you're going to be installing for your flat toe setup, I recommend doing that now. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to continue putting the rest of our parts on before we put the fascia back on in the bumper, because it's going to make it a lot easier to route everything and just a lot easier to get access to where we need to go. Now before we can put our bumper back in place, we're going to have to make a few cuts so that the arms can come through. Now we can either dry fit it and cut the area that we need to, or what I'm going to do is actually just use that line that goes around the plastic where our tow hook was as an outline and cut it out. I already cut the other side out, and you can see just went right around the edge using a knife, making a couple scores until it went all the way through, and then I can take the entire piece out. And if I need to, I can always come back and clean up the edges. Just file them down a little bit or sand them down. But it did make a pretty clean cut. Just a little bit of cleaning will clean that up. Whenever you're cutting, the only suggestion I do make is that you take your time and make really light passes just to score the plastic, and make several of those passes till it goes all the way through. If you push really hard, it will go through the plastic, but it's just a lot easier. It makes a cleaner cut if you make several passes with it. So I'm just going to do that going all the way around until I can pull this piece out. But now that we have our bumper trimmed out, we can grab our hardware and we can get our bumper reinstalled. Now again, I recommend getting an extra set of hands to help put your bumper back in place. But we're going to line everything up, and you want to get at least one bolt in. Usually I'll put that top bolt right here, at least hand tight, just so I know that the bumper's not going to fall
and I can work on getting all of the hardware put back in place. But again, you really want to make sure you get at least one bolt in on each side of your bumper. And typically these are the easiest to access because they're right on top. So once you slide it in, just get a couple threads on there. And we'll start putting the rest of the hardware in. Now if you're having trouble getting those bolts started by hand, or really getting in there and turning them, what you can do is you can take that 18mm socket and an extension, and that'll give you a little bit more room to turn and get access to that bolt. Whenever you put these push pins back in, you want to push the base in first, leaving that center section still sticking out, and then lock it down by pressing in that center section. Then we can put our hood latch release lever back in place. Now you don't want to just sit it on top because there's actually a channel that it slides onto. So we'll start further away, kind of get it lined up roughly, then just slide it right into place. The holes will line up, then we can replace those 2 torque screws that we removed at the very beginning. And with the base plate fully installed, we can take the arms. We want to make sure that ring, that pull ring, is on top. I'm going to push it all the way in. You'll see that ring kind of extends out. We'll rotate it, and it'll lock into place. Go ahead and do that for the other side, and that'll finish up your installation and your look at the Roadmaster Direct Connect base plate on our 2020 Chevrolet Silverado 1500.